The tragedy of the 2018 Houston Rockets. Welcome to this mini documentary about the 2018 Houston Rockets and how they went from being on top of the world to losing everything. Sit back, relax, and enjoy this little piece of work. The 2018 Rockets were a very special team, so much so that you could arguably put them as the second most interesting team of the late 2010s, next to the likes of the 2016 Golden State Warriors or the 2016 Cleveland Cavaliers. This team in particular is special because it came the closest to dethroning the juggernaut that was the Golden State Warriors. Now, I understand the Warriors once lost to a LeBron-led Cavaliers team in 2016, but in retrospect, when you look at the situation, you can make the argument that LeBron's Cavaliers team beat a team that was missing an integral piece of their team, the crucial piece being their power forward, Draymond Green. I understand Draymond wasn't what you would call a top-tier player at the time, but what Draymond was for the Warriors was a glue, a mesh that held the team together. Draymond Green was the little engine that could. He is where the Warriors got their fire from. He was a jack of all trades but a master of none on the court. He could give the Warriors 10 points, 10 assists, and 10 rebounds while simultaneously pumping them up. So with him missing in Game 5 of the 2016 NBA Finals, it was clear that the Cavaliers had a bit of an edge that allowed them to mount that 3-1 comeback against the Warriors. I don't want to take anything away from LeBron James and the 2016 Cavaliers, but when looking back at that championship, there are certain things that worked in their favor. But in 2018, we got a basketball team that was built for the specific task of dethroning the Kevin Durant-led Warriors, and they pushed the Warriors further than anyone else had in the late 2010s. To tell this story adequately, we're going to need to go back to the very beginning, back to the summer of 2017, in which the Rockets made some key acquisitions. On June 28, 2017, the Rockets acquired Chris Paul from the Los Angeles Clippers for Lou Williams, Patrick Beverley, Sam Dekker, Kyle Wiltshire, and Montrezl Harrell. After some failed seasons with the organization, point guard was looking for a fresh start and a place that would allow him to compete for that elusive championship that had evaded him for so long. After finishing the previous season with the 55-27 record and being eliminated by the San Antonio Spurs in the Western Conference semifinals, the Rockets were looking to shake up their team in order to put themselves in a position to compete the following year. So acquiring the veteran point guard made sense for the organization. While it made sense for the Rockets front office, many critiqued the move, citing how James Harden was a ball-dominant guard and would impede on Chris Paul's ability to fully exploit his talents. Nevertheless, the Rockets marched on with the move. The Rockets also made a number of key free agent pickups, such as Luc Mbah a Moute, the center Nene, and the power forward PJ Tucker. This set the Rockets up with the backcourt consisting of future MVP James Harden, 9-time All-Star Chris Paul, and shooting guard Eric Gordon. The team also consisted of Clint Capella, Gerald Green, and Trevor Ariza, a roster built to be the best in the league. And the best it was. The Rockets started the 2017-2018 season with a staggering 13-7 record, which was at the time the best record in the league, putting them in first place in the Western Conference. En route to this first place position in the West, the Rockets looked really promising, becoming one of the most prolific teams in NBA history. On their way to this 13-7 record, the Rockets began to show glimpses of greatness in their Mike D'Antoni orchestrated offense. The Rockets garnered talks about possibly being the best offense in the history of the league, and with good warranty, because the Rockets posted a season offensive rating of 115.7, making their offense statistically the best in the history of the league, outcompeting previous teams like the 2006-2007 Steve Nash-led Phoenix Suns, a team best known for their 7 seconds or less offense, in which they would score within 7 seconds of possession or less. With comparisons such as these, it became very apparent that the Rockets were becoming a contender for the title and a clear threat to the Golden State Warriors. But this outflow of praise did not distract the Rockets from continuing to win. In fact, this might have fueled the Rockets even more, because they went on to go on a winning spree from January 30th, 2018 to March 9th, 2018, winning 17 consecutive games, with this streak only coming to an end when the Rockets lost to the Denver Nuggets. But this was only a minor setback for a major comeback, because after that 14-point loss to the Nuggets, the Rockets used it as motivation and subsequently went on a second winning streak ranging from March 11th, 2018 to March 30th, 2018, winning a total of 11 consecutive games and ultimately losing to the San Antonio Spurs 100-83. So with these 2 winning streaks under their belts, it was clear the Rockets were a potential Western Conference favorites. The season ultimately ended on April 11th, 2018, and the Rockets would finish with an impressive 65-17 record, putting them 7 games ahead of the Golden State Warriors and securing the first place seed in the West. The NBA playoffs began on April 15, 2018, and with that, the Rockets matched up with the 47 and 35 Minnesota Timberwolves in the first round. At first sight, analysts speculated that the Timberwolves could at least give the Rockets some troubles on their way to the top, because the Timberwolves consisted of all-star center Karl Anthony Towns and all-star guard and power forward Jimmy Butler. In actuality, the opposite occurred, because the Rockets went on to make quick work of the Timberwolves, eliminating them in 5 games with a point differential of plus 44. And with that, the Rockets moved on to the Western semifinals and would face a Utah Jazz team that was rejuvenated and empowered by their emerging rookie star Donovan Mitchell. The Jazz were expected to at least slow the Rockets down, seeing how they had just eliminated a Russell Westbrook-led Thunder team in just 6 games. But alas, this was not the case, because the Rockets would show no mercy and displayed to the world why they were the first seed in the NBA and would go on to defeat the Jazz in the mere 5 games. After eliminating the Timberwolves and the Jazz via gentlemen's sweeps, the time had come for the Rockets to face the final test, to face the monster gatekeepers in the West. They had finally come face to face with the Golden State Warriors, and this was everything the Rockets and the entire NBA world had been looking forward to. All season long, many had prophesied this matchup, a Warriors team with world-class athletes on their rosters such as Stephen Curry and Klay Thompson, 2 players who were regarded and are still regarded today as the best 2 shooters the game had ever seen. And as if that were not difficult enough to overcome, the Warriors had added former MVP Kevin Durant to their roster 2 seasons prior. This was a Warriors team who had previously broken the all-time season win record held by the 1996 Chicago Bulls and who had only gotten better from then on. And on the other hand, this was a Rockets team that had the best record in the league and best statistical offense in the history of the NBA. The battle ahead was not looking easy for either of the 2 teams, but luckily the Rockets did have an advantage. Because they had finished the season with a 65 and 17 record and were the first seed in the NBA including the West, they had been gifted the privilege of playing in their home arena in the first 2 games and the final Game 7 if the series came down to it. 2 very important factors in a tight-knit situation such as this one. The Western Conference Finals finally tipped off on May 14th, 2018 at the Toyota Center in Houston, Texas. And to no one's surprise, the game did not disappoint. The Warriors walked away that night with a 101-92 win off the strength of their star Kevin Durant, who played 44 out of the 48 minutes and finished with 34 points on 52% field goal shooting, a very efficient outing for the defending champions. All was not dire for the Rockets in their loss to the Warriors though, because despite not having Chris Paul in the lineup due to injury that night, the Rockets still managed to make the win uncomfortable for the Warriors behind James Harden's 32 points, 6 assists, and 6 rebounds. This was a loss, but it was a tolerable loss. The Rockets were looking forward to having Chris Paul back in the lineup for Game 2 the following Wednesday night. After a day's rest, Game 2 tipped off on May 16th, 2018, 7 p.m. Eastern Time, again at the Toyota Center. And like the previous game, it did not disappoint, although it was a completely different story from the first game because the Warriors struggled to score on a fully healthy Rockets team. The Rockets held the Warriors to 105 points while easily scoring 127 points, essentially blowing out the defending champions. The story of the game was how the Rockets managed to marginalize the Warriors players except for Kevin Durant, while simultaneously being able to garner scoring from 4 of their starting 5 players. Stephen Curry and Klay Thompson were held to a combined 21 points, a feat easier said than done. While the Rockets were not able to slow down Kevin Durant, they were able to offset his efficiency by garnering scoring from 4 of the 5 starters. James Harden again led the Rockets with 27 points, followed by PJ Tucker's 22 points on 83% three-point shooting, knocking down 5 of 6 attempted threes. Trevor Ariza and Chris Paul contributed 19 and 16 points respectively. It was a stellar outing for the Rockets. They managed to play team basketball while forcing the opponent to play hero basketball, which in turn worked in their favor and subsequently tied the series at 1-1. With that, the series shifted to Oakland, California, where the Rockets would have to play at Oracle Arena, a place known to be extremely loud during the playoffs, something that can make or break a team. At 6 p.m. Eastern Time on May 30th, 2018, Game 3 would tip off. The shifting of the series seemed to undeniably affect the Rockets' level of play because the Rockets would start the first quarter poorly, being outscored 31-22 and getting outscored in subsequent quarters thereafter. The Rockets led the game only once in a first quarter and then were significantly outplayed after that. Like a complete 180 of the previous game, the narrative shifted because like the Rockets in Game 2, the Warriors managed to squeeze out productivity from all 5 of their starters. All Warriors starters scored 10 or more points. The Warriors rallied behind Kevin Durant and Stephen Curry's combined 60 points to blow out the overwhelmed Rockets, 126-85. Things looked dire for the Rockets after this staggering loss. The defending champions were starting to look like future champions if the Rockets couldn't somehow turn this around. And so with the Warriors leading the series 2-1, Game 4 became a must-win for the Rockets, because no team ever wants to find themselves down 3-1 no matter how good they may be. The Rockets headed into Game 4 with this mentality, and it proved to be useful for them because Game 4 was no walk in the park. In fact, it was anything but. Game 4 was almost a repeat of Game 3, with the Warriors again garnering tremendous efforts from all 5 of their starters. But unlike Game 3, the iron will of the Rockets' backcourt managed to save them from impending doom. Chris Paul and James Harden led their team to a narrow 95-92 win. The 2 guards scored 30 points and 27 points respectively, with the next closest form of help coming from Eric Gordon with his 14 points off the bench. But nonetheless, the Rockets managed to barely escape the Warriors and tie the series at 2-2, and were heading back to Houston for Game 5. The thought of returning to familiar crowds at the Toyota Center made things a little less bleak for the Rockets, and they would use this to shift the tide of the series. It was May 24th, 2018, and it was game day. Game 5 tipped off at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, and it would prove to be another rigorous battle. The Rockets managed to edge out the Warriors in a thriller of a game. The story of the game? Well, that was the unsung hero Eric Gordon, who came off the bench and managed to lead the Rockets with 24 points on 90% free throw shooting and 40% field goal shooting, an effort that proved to be much needed because, on the other hand, Kevin Durant led all scorers with 29 points, followed by Klay Thompson's 23 points, and 4 of the 5 Warriors starters managed to put up 12 or more points each. In retrospect, it's safe to say, had Eric Gordon not stepped up, it would have been a grim future for the Rockets because they would have been down 3-2 in a series that would have been heading back to the Lions' den to potentially get closed out in Game 6. But alas, that was not the outcome. With the victory of Game 5, the Rockets were in the best position possible. They were up 3-2 in a series with the pressure on the Warriors to win Game 6 or go home. And even if the Warriors had won Game 6, they still had to come to Houston for Game 7 and play on the Rockets' home turf. So the Rockets had the Warriors right where they wanted them. Unfortunately for the Rockets, the Warriors were not a regular team. They were a unicorn of some sort, a once-in-a-lifetime team that only comes once in every 2 or 3 decades, a combination of talent that theoretically could overcome any adversity thrown their way, and they proved this sentiment in Game 6. Backed into a corner, the Warriors retaliated like a feral animal, going into berserker mode and annihilating the Rockets in the same fashion as Game 1, despite Harden's 32 points, 9 assists, and 7 rebounds. The Warriors won Game 6, 115-86, devastating the Rockets and evening the playing field. While the Rockets felt confident they could edge out the Warriors at home in Game 7, the Warriors felt confident that they could ride the momentum of Game 6 into Game 7 and close out the Rockets once and for all. And so the stage was set for a showdown. Everyone knew the winner of Game 7 would likely go on to be crowned the 2018 NBA champions, seeing just how weak and depleted the Eastern Conference teams were. And so this in a sense served as the actual finals. The stakes were high. The winner moved on to face the Cavaliers. This is what the Rockets had been chasing for so long. A combination of acquisitions, trades, training, all led to this moment. It was do or die. May 28th, 2018, game day. The atmosphere at the Toyota Center was electric and loud. This must have fed the Rockets because they came out swinging and took control of the first quarter, leading for the majority of the quarter and establishing a fast-paced tone very early on in the game. James Harden especially looked poised for a high-scoring game, tallying up 14 points in the first quarter alone. It really looked as if the Rockets could outduel the Warriors, and the crowd was loving every second of it, erupting in chants with every basket made. As the whistle blew, the energy spilled over to the second quarter, quarter, the Rockets continued to keep their foot on the pedal, outscoring the Warriors by 14 at one point with the help of Clint Capella's 12 points. And by now, everyone in the arena believed that this was the Rockets' game to lose. If only they knew what was to come. The third quarter was a different story from the first half, because slowly but surely, the Warriors crept their way back into the game, outscoring the Rockets 33-15. It didn't help to know the Warriors had a propensity for erupting in the third quarter in most of their games. This is where their stars began to shine the brightest. Stephen Curry and Kevin Durant led the Warriors. The two MVPs posted 14 and 10 points respectively in the third quarter alone. The fourth quarter was even more devastating for the Rockets. The Warriors completely blew them out of the arena. The defending champs did exactly the opposite of what the Rockets did, because they made most of their shots, as opposed to the Rockets, who, starting in the second quarter, missed 27 straight three-point shots. This showed just how much they were missing Chris Paul, who had again been sidelined by his injuries. This would subsequently be the story of the game, which was fitting, because had the Rockets made just 4 of their missed three-pointers, they would have walked away from Toyota Center with a win and would have punched their tickets to the NBA Finals. But alas, that was not meant to be. The Rockets lost 101-92. James Harden, being the premier star of the team, took the brunt of the criticism and the shame, even though some could argue it wasn't his fault because he had posted 32 points, but that was besides the point, because he had shot 13 three-pointers and had only made 2, so he had contributed significantly to those 27 missed three-point shots, and bearing the blame came as a responsibility of being the star player. And with that, the season became a tremendous disappointment and a failure. Houston would go on to trade Chris Paul to the Oklahoma City Thunder for Russell Westbrook due to the personal feud that was brewing between James Harden and Chris Paul at the time. This trade was the last nail in the coffin and would conclude the tragedy of the 2018 Houston Rockets. The loss of Game 7 and the loss of Chris Paul, their story effectively becoming the story of 0 and 27 to signify those 27 missed three-point shots that cost them a trip to the NBA Finals. Thank you for watching this mini documentary. If you like this kind of content, I encourage you to like and subscribe and let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. Have a great day.